Hello, everyone. Welcome to this podcast series of HCLTech, Aerospace and Defense. Myself, Anshul Sharma, Industry Principal for Aerospace and Defense. And today I have with me Matthew Cordner, who is AVP and Principal A&D Business Architect from our SAP practice. Matt has over 35 years of A&D experience spanning engineering, manufacturing, supply chain, program management, and IT. And he has successfully led and managed numerous large-scale technology transformation programs, as well as business process improvement initiatives for aerospace and defense companies. So welcome, Matt, to this podcast, and great to have you here.
Thanks, Anshul. I really appreciate being invited.
Thank you. So, Matt, as we know that the aerospace and defense sector is undergoing a rapid transformation, and a lot of companies in manufacturing, especially within A&D industry, being dependent on SAP as their primary ERP solution. SAP S/4HANA is now a powerful solution or a platform to drive this digital transformation. But the real challenge for companies lies in kind of how they implement this transformation initiatives for S/4HANA. So today we'll try to explore in this discussion, what is the fit to standard approach for S/4HANA implementations, which is kind of SAP's recommended methodology for aligning business processes with best practices while minimizing customization. And then we'll look at this in the context of aerospace and defense industry and the challenges they face while adopting this approach. So let's jump into the questions. So Matt, for our audience, could you maybe first start with elaborating on what this fit to standard approach means in the context of SAP S/4HANA, and how is it different from traditional implementation approaches?
Sure, I'd love to. Most modern day applications that are large and broad and used pervasively across many different companies and globally have been really developing their software for so many years that they've become aware of what some of the standardized processes and best practice processes are in different industries. And SAP is no different. So SAP over the years has developed what they consider to be best business practices and have built those best business practices into how their software operates. And to differentiate it from traditional implementation approaches, for many, many years, the approach would be to sit down with the business and spend days, weeks, months even, mapping out all your business processes and saying, all right, what's my as is? So let's take a look at everything you do today and how you do it, a very exhaustive process. And then we say, what would you like it to be? And then we would go through this and define in business process maps all of the different changes that the business is asking for. And use that as a template for taking the capabilities inside of your ERP system, which back then was ECC, and mapping them and endeavoring to, in many cases, just recreate what they've always done with maybe a more efficient tool. We no longer do that because with all the best practices built into the tool, into S4, what we find is that we had many, many businesses on ECC that didn't get all the benefits they were looking for because they actually had replicated some of their bad practices from history. And so that's the major difference, is this fit to standard concept really allows us to go in, and especially in very large businesses where with the old methodology, you may end up with different implementation practices at different divisions of your company, which is very difficult to maintain and very difficult for people to move between business units in large companies when they're all so different. So that's why the fit to standard has become a very popular implementation approach.
Yeah. So thanks, Matt, for that explanation. It's interesting to see that how this fit to standard approach shifts the focus from customization to configuration, pre-configured templates, and kind of encourages organizations to adopt these best practices rather than reinventing the wheel completely. So building on that, why is SAP recommending this fit to standard approach as a kind of a default for S/4HANA implementations?
Well, for a variety of reasons, and one of which I've already mentioned, which was I think people were getting less value than they expected. And when SAP would go in and look at why is the value not happening, what they found was some of the capabilities that they built into their tool to execute a business process in a world-class way were being used to execute an old process. And in many cases, it was set up in a way that really wasn't an industry best practice. And so I think SAP has found over time that large companies with multiple divisions will receive far more value within each division and across the divisions. And especially as we move into the area of digital transformation, where data is so important, you want to have some synergy and synchronization between the data in all the different divisions of the company. And in addition to that, you'd like to be able to have some standards of metrics and business processes so that you can compare your different divisions of your company, and you can compare them to other organizations that are using those same best practices. So all the way around, it turns out to be best for businesses. And really much easier to manage on SAP's behalf, because ECC projects have become so huge as people kept asking for more and more and more things that were different than what came out of the box. And I think in many cases, the ERP implementers ended up getting a bad reputation because of the cost and schedule of many of those ECC programs.
Okay. And as I understand, SAP's emphasis on fit to standard is primarily kind of rooted in its desire to simplify these implementations and as you said, like reduce long-term maintenance costs so that organizations can accelerate this deployment. But despite these benefits, this approach is often misunderstood. So what do you think are some of the common misconceptions about this fit to standard approach that organizations should be aware of?
Well, the very first one is that fit to standard does not mean that SAP believes that every single requirement that you have in your business, especially complex regulated businesses like aerospace, can be met by the tool as it comes out of the box. And so people get a little bit nervous thinking that every single process is rigidly defined in advance, and I must run my business exactly the way that SAP has asked me to do that. And how could they possibly know what we do? We're special. Everyone thinks they're special, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the big revelations to many companies, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we deepen into this subject, is that SAP, in order to address that, has made their products very, very configurable. And what that means is anytime you go in to implement one of the best practice business processes, there's multiple choices in how you execute that. And at lower and lower levels of detail, there's many different ways that you can choose to configure the tool to meet different ways that people accomplish the same best practice business process. And so I think people are somewhat delighted when they get in and think that something's going to be very rigid, and it turns out to be even more flexible than they thought. In many cases, unleashing some creativity on the part of some of the business users that are involved in the process as they see that maybe they don't have to keep doing things the way they've always been doing it.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt, for highlighting some of those misconceptions and challenges. But I think it's evident that one thing which is often talked about is, especially given the regulatory nature of A&D sector, is the change management approach, which can kind of play a critical role in overcoming some of these misconceptions and challenges. But an industry like A&D is often with so much of regulatory compliances and compliance to these standards. Organizations could be resistant to change. So what do you think are the typical sources of resistance do you see from business users while adopting this approach, and how do you think we can actually address them?
Anshul, that's a great question, because really that is the number one issue in my mind in really successfully executing on budget and on cost an S4 implementation that yields business value. The number one barrier is a failure to listen to and address business concerns. And I have to tell you, my belief is that the biggest business concern really is related to managing complexity and variability within the business. I've had the wonderful opportunity over the first 30 years of my career to be an aircraft design engineer, to run shops and factories and final assembly. I've run flight operations for a large organization. I've run aircraft programs. So I know it sounds like maybe I had a hard time holding down a job, but I really enjoyed moving around and seeing how each one of these organizations received data and information from one organization, transformed it, passed it on to the next one. I was always a big student of the bigger picture and how process flows progress through these different applications. And so I have to tell you that when you're a design engineer or sitting on a shop floor or running a flight test organization, it turns out your biggest job is managing variation. What I mean by that, let's say a machine shop, is that every single day you're given a plan. And that plan gets interrupted in the first 10 minutes of the day because a part didn't show up, or an employee didn't show up, or an engineering change came through while you're halfway through building the part. All of a sudden the air conditioning goes out and all of your tolerances go south of the machine. It's a giant game of managing variation. And in a highly regulated business with very high precision tolerances, in the helicopter company I worked for, we would grind gears down to 2/millionths of an inch. If we didn't have thick enough floors and a forklift went by while we were grinding a gear, we could lose the tolerance and scrap a gear. It's so tightly controlled. And so when business users have systems that may be old, they may be archaic, and maybe they're expensive to maintain, but they work and they've figured out how to cope with their shortcomings, and IT shows up and says, "Hi, we're from IT, and we're going to transform you. We're going to change the way that you do your work, where you get your instructions from, what the instructions look like, how we plan, in what order that you build things." It's tremendously frightening. So these people are not resistant to change just because they don't like change. They're resistant to change because they manage variation for a living. It's the only way to consistently get high quality products out the door in aerospace. And when they didn't ask to be transformed and somebody tells them they're going to be transformed and they're going to love it, they're understandably skeptical. So one of the most effective ways to combat that, and really in my mind, the only way to effectively combat that, is to engage the business, right? And they have to feel listened to. They have to feel like they understand what their issues and opportunities are and what their fears are. And we do that through design workshops. And we sit down and walk the business through their processes and ask them questions. What's working? What's not working? And then we begin to show them some of the capability within the new system using, in many cases, a demo system and showing it live. And in many cases, we're using actual aircraft data so they can kind of identify that. And we can walk through, how do you do this today? In the future, here's another way that we could do that. Here's how we can overcome these problems. I like to call this the pull of technology. In many cases, IT organizations and many SIs are engaged in pushing technology. Hey, there's the business. We got this great tool. We're going to push it onto them. They're going to love it. It doesn't work, because the only people that have more power than a CIO with a $100 million program with the backing of the CIO is the person pushing the aircraft out the door, who at any point in time can stop the entire project and say, that won't work. I can't get my product out the door. And so sooner, you have to reconcile that sooner or later. And sadly, I see many aerospace companies having to deal with it near the end of the program, where the business, and we just went through one of the world's largest corporations just delayed a major go live because the business, with 1 week to go, said, wait a minute, we're not really sure we understand this the way that we need to. Let's stop and let's take a look at this again. That didn't have to happen. A properly executed design workshop with a good SI that understands not just the technology being pushed, but understands the underlying business processes represented by the users that are in the workshops is absolutely critical to creating that healthy push and pull of technology that sets up an implementation for success.
Yeah. And Matt, given some of these reasons you highlighted why, organizations are, resistant to this change and kind of this fear of standardization, which is there, how do you think, what is the most effective way basically companies can effectively communicate the flexibility and configurability of S/4HANA to reduce that fear? One of the approaches which I have heard is like, the design workshops, which kind of play an important role in this implementation journey. So maybe could you elaborate on what role, such design workshops play in managing change during a fit to standard implementation?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, the design workshops are your first exposure to the business, and they happen very early. Number one, it makes them feel listened to. Number two, it's your opportunity to demonstrate to the business that you care about their issues and opportunities, and you do understand how their business works. And so as they bring issues to the table, such as parameter effectivity, grouping, pegging, distribution, first article inspection, these are all Greek to people in any other industry that would not understand what any of those are. And those are the types of activities that have to work and have to work properly, or the S4 implementation won't work. And so it's critically important to have people involved in those design workshops that deeply understand those very unique A&D specific business processes and can speak that language. And it also helps if you understand how things are currently being done in aerospace. And that's why companies like HCL hire people like myself that have 40 years of experience, 30 of it on the business side, who have already been through that transition. And I can talk people through it and say, virtually holding their hand to say, I understand why you'd like to continue doing things this way, but let me show you a better way. And let me tell you that other companies have done it this way. And let me show you the benefits they've received from that. So it really all does come down to the ability to listen and the ability to show and demonstrate in aerospace terms what the new process could and should look like.
Yeah. And given some of the A&D specific business processes, Matt, which you highlighted, are there any challenges which are kind of unique for aerospace and defense industry when adopting a fit to standard? I mean, which could be differentiating from, let's say, a non-A&D company versus an A&D organization?
Absolutely. I just named a few of the processes that are not embodied in the SAP best practices that are inside of S4. Grouping, pegging, and distribution. If you're a government defense contractor, you have to be able to have cost traceability across programs, which means that when your demand comes in, you have to be able to package that demand up in logical groupings that make sense to the government also, because that process gets audited. There's things like traveled work. Very few industries do we end up having steps of work that everybody knows won't always be done in that order. But in aerospace, the aircraft and final assembly are so large and so complex with such long supply chains that very seldom do all the parts necessary for a particular operation show up on time. And so you end up having to record some things that get done later as you move the aircraft down the line. And it's critically important that that be tracked properly and resolved properly so that when it's done, every part is on the aircraft where it needs to be. And so many of these capabilities, and I could list dozens and dozens of them, are not capabilities that are already built into S4. And that's where SIs like HCL have really created gap-filling capabilities and accelerators that allow people to either take a capability we've already developed internally for, let's say, first article inspection. The first time you build a new aircraft, you have to have extra data that goes to the government. And shortage tracking, which is a huge endeavor in aerospace and defense. We've already built gap fillers. We've collected all those together into a product called Base 90, which implies that we have everything you need to fulfill 90% of your needs between S4 and the gap fillers that we have. And it really is an accelerator, because in companies that don't use a product like our S4 template Base 90, each one of those gaps has to be addressed either through customization or something created from scratch. We come to the table with dozens of those already solved, and dozens of canned reports, capabilities, training, demos, and so forth. And so that's the way at HCL we address that resistance and accelerate their ability to stay on track and stay on cost during the program, because we already know what some of those gap fillers are.
Yeah. Matt, you mentioned about some of our solution accelerators like Base 90, which kind of accelerates the implementation basically by providing 90% of industry specific business processes out of the box, which ultimately help in reducing risk as well as cost by so that the companies can leverage these pre-built templates and best practices. But do you see? I mean, are there any other examples where other business processes where which could be typically differentiating and may require deviation from standard approach?
Absolutely. It's a great question. There's no way that SAP and even HCL's Base 90 could meet every single need that people have, because at the end of the day, companies differentiate themselves in different ways. Some people spend enormous amounts of time and effort and money in putting together demand forecasting systems that are more accurate than their competitors, and they have proprietary algorithms built into them. We have one customer right now that really has developed some unbelievably complex capabilities for demand forecasting for spare parts. And there's other businesses that really spend a lot of time and effort in inventory management to lower their overall investment. And they manage inventory in a way that is not built into S4 and that we don't have in our capability tool set in Base 90. And so in many of those areas, and let's just say that's 2 to 3% of all the capabilities a customer needs, by the time you take everything they want and all of their business capabilities that they're asking for, we typically find that 2/3 of them can be satisfied with S4 either straight out of the box or with some configuration. Beyond that, maybe another 10 or 15% can be taken care of with some extensibility tools offered by SAP that, of course, HCL can help with, whether that's BTP or any of the other capabilities that SAP has to say, all right, it's beyond configuration. We're going to add this capability, but we're going to add it in such a way that when SAP upgrades, it upgrades with it, right? And the BTP platform can help with that. So let's say you ended up with 2 or 3% capabilities that can't be satisfied by either one of them. There's two different paths you can go down. One is to rely on your third-party tools, which if a third-party tool already has an existing interface, which means they're keeping up with enhancements and updates to S4, and therefore they will keep their product current with the latest S4 capabilities, then we may go out and recommend a third-party tool that fills that gap if that such a gap exist and there is a third party, and in many cases there are. And we work with many third-party companies that we bring in for those types of specializations. And if there is no third party, then, with the enormous over 200,000 employees and vast capabilities of HCL all around the world, and labs and capabilities in programming, development, customization, AI, for example, where we have almost 10,000 people working full-time in AI, many of the differentiations our customers want may be in the AI space, then we can go out and we can actually do those customizations for them. Now, we'll prefer to do that in a way that's extensible and in alignment with SAP's roadmaps, which is what we often do. But in some cases, something custom has to be built. Very rare exception, something very custom has to be built. And you want an SI that has the depth and breadth and capability to actually execute those without having to go up to another company to go custom develop something.
Yeah. Matt, I think you already highlighted some of the, how we are helping our customers, bridging these industry specific gaps from our solution accelerators like Base 90. I want to specifically also, for the benefit of our audience, I want to also highlight, we also have solutions like IPO and IMRO from a complex manufacturing as well as aftermarket perspective. So maybe if you could elaborate on, these two solution accelerators as well, how do we address the industry specific gaps from solution accelerators like PEO as well as IMRO as well?
Yes, it's a great question. Very often when these gaps are found, we need to create some gap filling capabilities, we like to align those with products that already exist within SAP. So one big success story for our customers is the fact that HCL has spent enormous time and effort investing in the capabilities and tools and understanding of production engineering and operations, PEO, which is SAP's tool for manufacturing execution and operations. And so we have quite a large practice in that space and are leading several large aerospace and defense companies through large PEO implementations. In the same way that S4 has some gaps, PEO has some gaps also. The nice thing about PEO is it's an MES system that's embedded into S4, so there's no interface. Some of the most painful interfaces and some of the biggest constraints in process throughput in aerospace companies are the custom interfaces between the shop floor and the ERP system, because enormous amounts of data, millions of pieces of information go through that interface every single day, sending requirements out to the supply chain and shop floor, and then taking the status of all of those orders and sending it back every single night, or even more often, back to the ERP system. And so PEO completely eliminates that interface because it's actually built into the product, but it has some gaps also. And so, as I said earlier, we like to coordinate those gaps with SAP. So with our biggest customer for PEO, we've set up this wonderful triangle of development with SAP's headquarters in Waldorf and their development organization, where we jointly, with the customer, ourselves, and SAP, look at the requirements and decide if they are requirements that are specific to our client or can be used elsewhere in aerospace. And then we see if they're already on the SAP roadmap. And if so, will they be done in time? And then we jointly decide, will HCL solve that in a manner similar to the way SAP would solve it now on behalf of SAP until it's done on the roadmap, or is it going to be done specifically only for that client? So we have a large number of capabilities that we've done specifically for some of our clients that we have now added into a tool we call IPEO, which is basically PEO with those gap filling enhancements built into it. And then we have another product, the IMRO, where we're really the premier and standardized response to anybody that needs maintenance, repair, and overhaul capability in aerospace and defense. As many people know, the process of maintenance, repair, and overhaul has many of the characteristics of the needs of a production ERP system, but many things that are different. You deal with used parts. You have to bring in things from the field and break them down. And some parts always get replaced. Some parts only get replaced sometimes. But typically, they're very expensive parts, and they have a long cycle time to repair or to source the parts. So it's very important that all be done very quickly, or that pools of parts be repaired in advance. So there's some very specialized capabilities required in that space. And for, I think it's almost over 15 years now, we've had the premier tool in that space that works with S4 and previously ECC called IMRO. And it fills many gaps. In fact, a very large gap in the SAP landscape for people that want to execute maintenance, repair, and overhaul. And not just in aerospace, any complex products such as rails or railways and so forth, and locomotives, and can be applied to those also. So that's been a very successful product for us, and really the growth and interest in that product is really kind of almost exploding now.
Well, thanks, Matt, for those insights, and I think this will definitely provide more clarity to our audience and potential customers on this fit to standard approach, and how can they successfully apply it in aerospace and defense. Before I conclude, I'd like to ask one more question, Matt. So ultimately, the objective of the companies is also to see a quantified business impact on where they can demonstrate a measurable business value. So maybe from your experiences, can you share any success story where you have demonstrated a measurable business value to the customers, and the kind of feedback that you receive from our customers?
Sure, I can do that. Our customers are notoriously shy about sharing such information, especially on the defense side. And so we typically don't tend to attribute them to a specific company. But generally what we're seeing is with the new Fiori user interface, which is far more intuitive and combines many screens, it is very role-based. And of course, as we know, was sourced out of the mobile experience that everybody loves so much. I think what we're finding is when you get into the areas of high transactions, which is where a lot of the labor is in many aerospace companies, whether that's MRP planners, whether it's buyers, whether it's stock clerks, whether it's quality inspectors that have, in some cases, hundreds and hundreds of transactions a week. What we're finding is that you're looking at 30, 40, sometimes even 50% less time spent transacting in the system and more time interacting with the process and the parts based on the implementation of these capabilities. Another area of surprise to many people is that because all these gaps on ECC had existed for so long, a whole subculture of gap filling tools and capabilities, some people call it shadow IT, have all popped up, whether it's in how the transactions are actually executed or people rearranging, let's say, the order in which parts are built, or especially in the areas of reporting and analytics, where there's this whole subculture of people, sometimes whole departments and tools and capabilities that have been built up over time in order to make up for, I call them coping mechanisms or institutionalized Band-Aids. And we find many customers very delighted to find that entire subculture can almost be totally eliminated when people see that the capabilities that they need that they've never had are now embodied in the tool that they have, including the reporting and analytics. And as we move forward, even in the AI space, which has the opportunity, once you have all your data aligned in a fit to standard approach, it just sets the stage for wonderful gains and opportunities leveraging AI. If you can put all of your proprietary and internal data into a large language model, now you get into conversational interfaces and the ability to completely automate things. So in many cases, where we're at right now, I think we'll look back on one day and say, yes, there was some benefit, but the biggest benefit was that we built a platform for future digital transformation.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to conclude, Matt, and real world examples like these would definitely help our potential customers and show them the value to, how this fit to standard approach can help in the companies drive digital transformation. So thank you very much, Matt. It was great speaking with you, and thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks, Anshul. Appreciate the opportunity.